Welcome to the Frontline with FPM, where we talk about California politics, homeschool freedom, parental rights, and the family. I'm your host, Nathan Pierce, and thanks for joining us today. Let's jump right in and see what's going on here on the Frontline. Hi, folks. We're here today, Nathan Pierce and Drew Olander from Family Protection Ministries, talking about sort of a timeline of SB 866 and the issues surrounding it. So I'm glad to have you with us today. And thank you, Drew, for participating and really driving the outline for today's recording.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
Glad we can talk about this. It seems like there's so many different pieces to the story of what's happened with SB 866 this year, and there's so many things that have happened this year. It's just been a whirlwind.
Yeah.
So it's been quite a job to try to remember all the different pieces of what we've done, what has happened on SB 866, and that's in the middle of all the other legislation that we've worked on this year. But for right now, we're going to be just trying to narrow that down just to focus on SB 866, but certainly we'll have to bring in a few details from some other things. So let's jump in and get started with what SB 866 was about, and then we can talk about the context in that time period. So what was SB 866 about?
Yeah, so it was introduced early this year in like late January. It was a really spurred on during like the state's response to COVID and everything that's happened in the last couple of years. And it was a bill from Senator Scott Wiener that would basically allow children aged 12 and up to receive vaccines without their parents' consent. So it was basically advertised as, this is a way for teens to keep themselves safe in the case that their parents don't want to get them vaccinated, or are, I think the term that was used was medical neglect.
Mm-hmm.
That was the term from the author, from the senator. And it was really intensely pushed right out of the gate. It was like, we have to get this passed now. We have to get this passed as soon as possible, just in order to make sure that these young people can basically guard against, any disease. So it wasn't just for COVID, but it was all vaccines. Anybody 12 and up could get them without parental consent.
Right.
That was the
And
start.
it's interesting that a lot of the discussion about this bill, particularly when we get into talking about the first committee hearings, the focus of the bill itself didn't actually address COVID itself at all. It
No.
addressed vaccines in general and was all about allowing kids to, without their parents' knowledge, even as well as consent, kids could get these vaccines, uh, and it didn't have to even be on their required list from their school. It had to be just the list was broader than
Hmm.
a lot of people realized that it was, and so yeah, it was pretty awful just from the get go.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very broad and it was very vague. It was a very short bill. I mean, it was maybe two paragraphs in total, not counting the quick summary at the beginning from the Legislative Council. But yeah, it was very brief and very wide reaching.
Yeah. So this happened right. It was introduced, like you mentioned, in late January,
Hmm.
the 20th. If I remember right,
Yes, yeah, the
um,
20th.
the 20th of January, and just about 3 weeks prior to that, we had sent out a letter in the mail right at the end of December, telling
Hmm.
our supporters, "Hey, we are anticipating a string of vaccine freedom related, medical freedom related bills that will be bad coming
Yeah.
in the beginning or the beginning of the session and possibly in early January. And so this one, sure enough, popped up in late January, but it wasn't the only bill, and nor was it the only bill presented by Mr. Weiner either. He was involved in a number of other bills that related to medical freedom and vaccines.
Hmm.
So what were some of those bills, and um, what kind of freedoms were those bills addressing?
Yeah, so they were there was a number of them from both senators and assembly members that were all co-sponsored among various groups of legislators in both houses. So another big one was AB 1993, which was basically a universal employee mandate for COVID vaccines specifically that had to be enforced by the employer. That one didn't make it very far. That one died pretty quickly. It faced heavy opposition from all sorts of groups. And then another one was SB 871, which would have added the COVID vaccine to the list of required vaccines for school for students. Um, let's see. There were various ones that enacted universal testings, some for schools,
Right.
some for the general population, and there were a number of there was one actually that would penalize doctors for spreading what was deemed medical misinformation. And unfortunately, what we've seen, in the heat of the moment, in a lot of, especially the beginning of the pandemic, there were a lot of people that were blamed for spreading misinformation that turned out to be correct. It
Right.
was just, it just was. I mean, everybody was frantic, and I think there was a lot of very sudden and looking, in hindsight, now incorrect decisions in terms of labeling things like that. So those were just some of them. There was also regulations coming from the governor's office saying, "Hey, we're planning on doing universal vaccine mandates for schools," and under those, under emergency powers, there were many executive orders coming out, in terms of testing and funding and things like that. So it was from all corners of the government. There were many regulations and laws on this topic, and they were there.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were one after the other, rapid fire. So
Yeah. Yeah. So this was beginning of January. This was January of 2022.
yes.
So we had been under a state of emergency, and a state where we had a bunch of uh, orders from the governor and various departments, the public health department,
Hmm.
um, over the last year and a half, 2 years. But now we're here in January of 2022, and now it's the legislature that is looking at putting these things on the books in terms of the permanent laws
Yeah.
for California. So this was a kind of a new concern, and it was a bigger concern because this has got an element of permanency to it. It's something that's going in the code, and it's going to be there forever, not just a temporary order issued by the governor,
Hmm.
but something that's going to be on the books perpetually. So what
Yeah.
we're looking at here now is all these proposals in January of 2022, um, looking at, okay, how are we going to address these different issues related to medical freedom,
Hmm.
and um, and we're looking at these bills, and obviously we kind of had some expectations of what to look for, and so we're watching specifically some particular legislators that we knew would had said they were going to be proposing some things.
Yeah.
So Senator Weiner was one of those, and this bill, when it first came out, we were very concerned about it, and started working on not just um, getting our own opposition letters ready, but strategizing on what other groups can we work with on this bill, and who is already ready to take action on these things, and then
Hmm.
how along down the line are we going to work on this. So there was a lot we were doing here at FPM right from the get-go back in January, and um, ultimately the bill didn't move right away. A lot of bills sit for a little while because there aren't really any committee hearings for a little while in
Yeah.
January because everybody's so busy introducing bills. So the first hearing on this one was January 5th. Why don't you talk about that a little bit, Drew?
Um, I believe it was actually so not January 5th,
Sorry. Yeah,
May 5th.
May
Yeah,
5th. Thank you.
yeah, it was one of the fifths. Yeah, so it sat at the desk, and then it was, later assigned to a committee, and it finally had its first hearing almost 5 months or 4 months, almost 4 months after it had been introduced. And so that was in the Senate Judiciary hearing, and there was plenty of people representing various groups that showed up in support and opposition. And it was right out of the gate in the first hearing. It was very hotly contested. It was,
So so this bill wasn't heard in the health committee. this this was one of the things that was so shocking to me.
yeah,
It was referred to the health committee initially, right?
yes, exactly.
And
And then,
then
yeah, in both houses, it was only heard in the Judiciary Committee.
so
So,
that makes so little sense to me. But yeah, that's what happened. It
yeah.
was actually referred and then it was reneged. They pulled it
Hmm.
back.
And most
They
most of the
unreferred it.
other exactly, and most of the other bills similar to this, like in this vein, uh, of the COVID reaction bills, most of them went through the health committee, but this one specifically was referred, and then, like you said, unreferred, and then ended up just going through the Judiciary Committee. So that in itself was interesting to see. It was
Yeah.
odd enough, but yeah, during this committee hearing, um, there was there were some concerns brought up uh, from the um, from the committee members, but the opposition wasn't really formed at that point. There was some slight mentions of things like, concern for, okay, how would this affect, a child's relationship with their parent, like what does this do to the dynamic between, in terms of parental rights and their duty to make decisions for their children before they are of age. And then there were concerns about um, basically unforeseen medical complications. I've had bad reactions to medication in the past, to vaccines, and there's things you don't know, especially as a kid, and that parents have the responsibility to inform you on, and make sure that you're taken care of in that regard. So there were murmurs of concerns like that, but um, from the committee itself, there wasn't a lot of discussion. There
Right. And
wasn't a lot
it's
of opposition.
and it's interesting because again, it's the Judiciary Committee.
Hmm.
It's not a an education committee that
Exactly.
interacts with schools and parents on these issues. It wasn't a health committee that interacts with parents and doctors on these issues. It was the
Hmm.
Judiciary Committee, which is where they kind of they decide whether something um, is is legal. I guess they work on the making sure that this is going to pass constitutional muster. They're wanting
Hmm.
to make sure that once they get this through, that they have solid ground to stand on in terms of defending this bill.
Yeah.
Um, and it seems ridiculous to me that there was so little heed paid to the people that were concerned about this bill. Obviously,
Hmm.
we had sent out an action alert about 2 days prior to this committee hearing,
Hmm.
And I know that I was one of many people that stood in line and testified in opposition to this bill.
Yeah.
Um, but again, going back to what we had mentioned before, the main proponents of this bill were a group of kids that wanted to be able to get their own COVID vaccine. That was the main focus of
Hmm.
the proponents of the bill was teenagers who wanted more freedom in their ability to say, regardless of what my parents say, I want to make sure that I can get this vaccine, this COVID vaccine specifically. And they acted and spoke as though that was the only part of this bill. That's what it was about.
Yeah.
Um, and and I think that that's a good picture of what I run into a lot of times in the legislature where there's a bill proposed and the conversation about the bill is focused on one tiny aspect of it, which to me, SB 866 is so much bigger than that. And we'll get into that a little more here, but SB 866 was not just about the COVID vaccine. It's about so much more. And it touches on so much more even outside of the vaccine world or that whole discussion of medical freedom. That's at the core of it.
Hmm.
But it's the concerns that we had were broader than that. So I think that seeing the actual presentations um, in that committee hearing were fascinating to see how narrow the focus was there.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. It was pointed, and we actually, like you're saying, with that, with those broad implications, we ended up um, going through it, and we sent out more than 20 opposition points, reasons why this would have a negative effect on, it, and like you said, not specifically related to, the COVID vaccine or vaccines in general, but the overarching concern of parental rights, right? Of
Hmm.
parents being able to fulfill their duties and obligations and responsibility to care for their children. And the overarching concern with this bill and with a number of other bills from these, some specific legislators, including Senator Weiner, was just the replacement of the parent with the state acting as the caretaker of the child, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And we've talked extensively about what sort of responsibility um, and what sort of place the state has, right? The duties,
right,
like biblically speaking, what limitations there are on it, what what abilities it holds, and where the line is that it shouldn't cross.
right. Yeah, because
You
I
know.
mean, God made a family. He gave children to parents,
Hmm.
and no matter how you look at that, and no matter how you look at our society today, there's no way around acknowledging that a family, the way that God designed it, is the best formula for the upbringing of a child,
Yeah.
and that level of protection is really key, and those in even the medical community will acknowledge that. Now, in this particular bill, I've had a lot of people ask me, why are homeschoolers involved in this particular bill, and
Mhm.
I've had questions like that about other medical freedom related bills in the past, and and honestly, it's pretty simple to explain why homeschoolers care about this bill based on the homeschool argument. I mean, a lot of people care about medical freedom that also care about homeschool freedom as two separate pieces of their big picture. But I'm talking about how do you answer the question, why do you care about this bill with specific regard to homeschool freedom? And that's really easily explained by just looking at the pillars on which homeschool freedom stands. And homeschool freedom in California and across America stands on two basic principles. One is the concept of parental rights. Parental rights and that freedom to function as a family um, is one of the key elements of homeschool freedom. The other one is religious freedom. Now, this particular bill goes after both of those things because it attacks parental rights by saying parents do not have authority over their own children, and saying the government has authority to force a child to make a decision without their parents there and without their parents knowing about it. Now, the other aspect of this with the religious freedom is that it's going after people that, for religious reasons have uh, an objection to a particular vaccine, or to their children being taken over, basically having decisions made for their children by the government. I mean, so it kind of, no matter which angle you look at it, it's going at the very root of the freedoms that hold up homeschool freedom. And so, regardless of what your view is of what the bill was actually dealing with in terms of vaccines, it's going after parental rights and religious freedom, which are the foundation for homeschool freedom, which is what we at our very core here at FPM are fighting to protect. And so it was not hard for us to make a decision that this was a bad bill and something we needed to tell people about and take action against. And so that's kind of at the core of why SB 866 was so high on our radar and so high on our priority list for this year, even in the midst of, as we mentioned earlier, all the other bills we were dealing with. This one was way up there because it attacks both of those things. Both of those things are essential to maintaining homeschool freedom as we know it today in California. And we had to take action, and we continue to have to be vigilant to maintain the freedoms that we have. And that means keeping an eye out for any bill like this. So
Yeah.
um so that was something we recognized from the get-go, and we kind of pointed out these issues in our early action alerts, even as early May.
Hmm.
And so we know that there were a lot of people up in arms about it from the homeschool community because they saw the threat there. And then kind of we just moved on from there into it was what, a week later that it after it passed that first committee, the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, about a week later it passed the floor of the Senate.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was passed unanimously, vote 7-0 out of the Judiciary Committee. And then exactly a week later, it was voted on the floor and passed to the Assembly. It wasn't overwhelmingly supported, but it was a majority. And so after it was passed mid-May, it was then set for a hearing in the Assembly, and it wasn't until June 1st that it got its first Assembly Committee hearing. Also, this time the Judiciary Committee, not the Health Committee, just the Judiciary. That's the only committee in either house that it went to. And so the committee in the Assembly is made up of entirely different members than the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. And it was during this hearing that the the author, Senator Weiner, had to definitely he definitely faced more opposition from the committee itself. There was, many of the same groups. I mean, FBM was there testifying in opposition again, and the crowd had grown in the room. It was full,
Yeah.
and in the meantime, after there had been public testimony in support and in opposition, the committee had questions for the author, and so we've actually got a clip of one of the assembly members Assemblywoman Lori Davies. She basically brought up what many of the groups opposed to the bill had brought up. Not making it about specific disagreements over vaccines or specific vaccines at all, um, but just the overarching concern um, that that those in opposition had. So I've got the clip right here. Um, Let me know if you can see it. All right.
Yeah, it looks good.
All right. So I'll just play a little bit of it. Um, so
This is a parental right, a right to know that their child is safe. Why is it that we have them have to write consents if they want to take a field trip? Why is it that they have to have consent of right, if they want to play a sport? But we can go ahead and give a 12-year-old, 13-year-old the right to make this decision. This is not about vaccinations. This is about the rights of parents. I can tell you growing up, and you were saying that these kids are going, listen, my parents won't let me get this vaccination. My parents won't let me get this type of immunity. Growing up, I remember, with living in Wisconsin, and I wanted to go to that football game, and it was snowing. And I'm like, Mom, I want to go. And she's like, you're not getting in a car or a bus because it's dangerous. But I'm like, but the other kids are doing it. Well, you're not the other kids. And you know what? I said, well, you're not fair. You don't listen to me. You don't understand. That's the same type of reason a child could come up and say the same thing, going, my mother doesn't understand. She doesn't want me to have this vaccination. We don't think really well when we're kids. We just know what we're angry about, and these are our emotions and our feelings. But common sense tends not to come in there, again, at the age of about 25. So why, when we're looking, you said about 74% of all kids are vaccinated. Instead of taking the rights away from parents for that 25%, why don't we educate and have education for the parents? And just because something is a bill doesn't mean it's a good bill. I could go on and on and on about bills that aren't good. So let's work together and let's look at education. You know what? You're teaching the kids education here, but the parents may not have the education. As you said, we have orientation. Let's bring parents in. Let's talk to them about the questions they may have.
so she brought up um, basically the concern over uh, why would we have consent forms for all sorts, for field trips, for any sort of extracurricular thing, and then in this case allow kids to to uh, consent to
Do,
what is essentially it's um, I mean vaccination is it's a medical procedure to a certain extent, obviously in a very very small form.
it's
um
it's a medication. I mean, most
yes.
medications you can't get as a minor without
Hmm.
parents' consent. I mean, yeah, it's incredible how she ties that into field trips. And you have to sign a medical waiver when you go for your kid if they're going to any number of different things. If they want to go to a summer camp or all these different things, but the student can just go and get a vaccine through this bill if
Hmm.
without the parent at all. So, and that's the medical waivers that you would sign for your child, whether it's going to a field trip or going to a summer camp. Those are just in anticipation of a potential issue. But this is actually a known issue, and they're saying, well, let's just go ahead and give the freedom to the child without their parents' consent, but also without the parents' knowledge,
Hmm.
which kind of leads to another issue, which is, what happens when the kid has repercussions from this, or they have a reaction, some sort of an allergic reaction to one of the contents of any one of these vaccines. There's a whole bunch on that list that a number of people have had allergic reactions to. It's not my opinion. It's there's a whole government agency set to deal with these types of issues. And yet the parents don't have the authority to even know whether there's going to be a shot that was given, so that they couldn't even know later if there's some problem with their child. They couldn't even have the information to know what, let alone if their child had received a vaccination, so they could know what they could be reacting to. So there's all kinds of issues with this, and Lori Davies, I think, explained it really well in that committee hearing. So that was in the assembly, right, Drew? That was
Yeah.
assembly judiciary.
Yeah, and there's a longer discussion that took place between Kevin Kiley, Assemblyman Kevin Kiley, and Senator Weiner. It's closer to 20 minutes. So we're not going to go through the whole thing here, but on our YouTube, the full thing is either is up already or will be up
Yeah,
within, uh, a day or so. And it's a great discussion between the two of them. It gets a little heated, which I always enjoy watching political heated discussions.
yeah,
So yeah, and uh, but that was definitely those two. There were a number of others that voiced similar opposition, but I think those two really displayed a great deal of competence in basically laying out the main issues that they
yeah,
had.
yeah. And I
Um,
really appreciate that happening in committee.
yeah, I do as well. Yeah, so I mean, despite that, that opposition, you could see it was growing. There were more, like I said, compared to the kind of mellowed opposition points made to it in the Senate, by the time it had reached the Assembly, there were definitely some well-formed and very clear concerns that people had. And those legislators, along with everybody that testified against it, they pointed them out. And it ended up passing the committee on a vote of 6-4, so it was much closer. But it ended up being voted, and it had no other committees to go through. So basically, at that point, after coming out of the Judiciary Committee in the Assembly, it really only had to come up for a floor vote, and it would require a majority, and then it would be passed to the governor, who could sign it into law.
Right.
So it was really on the home stretch, beginning at the beginning of the summer.
So yeah, and that kind of takes me back to this other point about kind of why I got so worked up that it wasn't getting referred to multiple committees, because it seemed extremely appropriate that this bill be heard by the Education Committee and Health Committees of both houses. And one of the other reasons why, aside from the fact that it's appropriate material for them to be reviewing, it's appropriate that they get a chance to weigh in on this type of policy. In addition to that, each time that a bill is referred to another committee, that's another place for that bill to need approval before moving forward. So it's a chance for a bill to die. So when
Yeah.
you have a committee that's heard a bill and it doesn't move on to another committee, it moves straight to the floor like this bill did in both houses, it's only got that one chance to be weighed and to be given opposition, to have discussion, and for that bill to die. And so this bill, it may have been initially referred to more committees, but it ultimately only went to two committees, which means it only had two committee chances to be voted down. Only had two opportunities for a committee to weigh in on it, and only two chances for a committee to vote it down and for it to die there. So once in the Senate committee, Judiciary Committee, and then on the Senate floor, then in the Assembly Judiciary Committee. And so now we're here in our timeline, we're here on the Assembly floor, which is basically its last stop before it goes to the governor's desk.
Yep. Yeah, and once it hit the assembly floor, things started getting very interesting. I was, I spend, I mean, much of what I do is just monitoring bills online, monitoring chatter from legislators, looking for news updates, anything that I can, and then all of the time that we spend at the Capitol following these committee hearings, following the floor sessions, and lo and behold, I was, early June, prominent assembly members, Democrats, started voicing opposition to it, because
Yeah.
most Republicans were opposed to it, to begin with a lot of them voicing concerns that were voiced by like Davies and Kiley in the committee. But as the month of June progressed, and they take a break in July, so all of July there would be no action on it. But as the month of June progressed, more and more legislators started either saying, you know, I'm either not going to vote or I'm going to vote against it.
Hmm.
And some of them put out public statements. So we had on the 7th of June, we had a statement from Assemblyman Patrick O'Donnell, who is the chair of the Education Committee, um, and he said, I support vaccinations. I'm vaccinated myself, and he said, but this is an issue of parental rights. He said, I don't want that violated. I wouldn't want that violated for myself as a parent, and I can't support this legislation. He said, I'm going to be voting no again. If it comes up, I'm going to vote no.
Right.
And then about a week later, Assemblyman Via Padua, he also put out a very similar statement, saying, I'm a dad. I would not want to be stripped of the ability you know, to make this decision for my kids. I wouldn't want to be replaced,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so, and there were more and more, as we were down at the Capitol constantly, every floor session, there was, the potential for it to come up for a vote. And more there was, more legislators coming out saying, I'm not sure I'm going to support this, or I'm just not going to vote, or I'm going to vote no.
Right.
And so the chances of it passing seemed to continue to drop, and yet it hadn't been brought up for a vote. Something of note too, that was ongoing the entire time was Senator Weiner, the author, basically labeling opposition to his bill as just anti-vaccine misinformation. That was what he labeled it as. This is just anti-vax people just don't want teens to be able to make the choice to get vaccinated, and so they're just opposing it because they hate the COVID vaccine or something specific, right? And so he made many statements like that online, and the response actually from many legislators and from many people opposing it is saying, I don't think you're hearing us.
Right.
That's not the issue. That's not the main concern here at all.
Right. And in
um
fact, I remember the I appreciated O'Donnell's statement, um, which incidentally came out the day after we hand delivered letters
yeah,
explaining why a number of groups of people were not supporting SB 866. Why did parents oppose SB 866? Why do medical professionals oppose SB 866? Why do ER doctors oppose SB 866? And we delivered that letter to, I think it was the entire assembly,
yeah,
on the 6th of was it the 6th of June?
yeah. It was the 6th of June. It was a Monday, and then that Tuesday he
Yeah.
came out with that statement, and then a week following more and more statements
and
came
and
out. Yeah,
and those statements were so, I appreciated them so much, especially O'Donnell's statement that particularly pointed out that this was a slippery slope
Hmm. He,
against parental rights.
yeah, he almost used our language verbatim in his
Yeah,
statement, which was really, really cool to see. Yeah, and so as this grew, basically, it was this 2 week span, right? And the break was fast approaching, the July break. So they had until June 31st before they would take a month off and nothing could happen. And on the 16th, um, the uh, the bill was actually amended. So, in an attempt to basically quell the opposition, to say, all right, people, calm down, we'll moderate it a little bit, they raised the age of consent for vaccines from 12 to 15. So they said, all right, fine, anybody 15 and up can do it without parental consent. And of course, the opposition continued because the age uh, isn't the issue, right? I mean, minors are under their parents' responsibility and protection. So whether
right,
it's 12 or 15, the issue still stands.
right,
Obviously, there are differences between a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old in terms of their development. And yet, the ultimate responsibility until you're 18, until you're an adult, your your parents are responsible for you
right.
legally, you
Yeah,
know? And so the opposition remained, and
yeah.
it didn't go away.
And this is a tactic that we've seen many, many, many times, where the idea is to present a bill that seems really extreme and then back off of it and get a piece of it. And I've seen it so many times, and I've seen, that when you take 10 steps forward and 9 steps back, and you still get that one step, and if you do that 10 times, you've still got your 10 steps. And that's how a lot of bad policy gets implemented in California, is 10 steps forward, 9 steps back, and that process repeated over and over and over again, creating worse and worse bad policy in California. And that's, I think he was, with that amendment in this particular bill, he was trying to get, 10 steps forward and maybe 2 or 3 steps back. But still, I mean, that's a major encroachment onto parental rights. And as you said, Drew, it doesn't change the principle that parents are still the appropriate authority for those children.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And you know, the uh, the support for it, the rationalization for it was still the same. It was still on a very specific scale. Like, these teens, well, they said, well, my parents won't let me get vaccinated, and I want to, especially in light of COVID, and but the opposition, the points didn't change at all. I mean, it's the principle remained, and so the opposition remained, and in light of that, um, it wasn't brought up for a vote in time for the July break. So after that amendment, there was still floor sessions. We were still monitoring every time, all right, is there any, chatter of it possibly being brought up? Is there any changes? And uh, June 31st came and went, and they ended up going on break. And so there was a month of silence on it. In the meantime, we spent time communicating with other groups, with legislators, and really, and with our own supporters, continuing the development of and the maintenance of opposition points, right?
Right.
So the opposition points remained, and uh, in the meantime, they were really only strengthened during that break. And opposition, coming into August, the home stretch of the legislative session, opposition had grown for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and so, coming into August, that was one of the most hectic months of the year, I would say, in my own
Yeah.
experience.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it just it just seemed like it just kept going on and on, day after day. But ultimately, as we already know the end of the story, um, it never ended up coming up for a vote. We kept hearing, it could be today, it could be tomorrow. And we were there day after day after day, and still, we didn't have it coming up for a vote again.
Yeah, yeah, and in those final weeks coming up to the end of the legislative session, August 31st is the last day the legislature can pass legislation to the governor, and then he has a month to sign or veto. And so in that last month, there was a few key days near the end that I remember distinctly, just because of the odd dynamic happening on the assembly floor, where you had, it's supposed to be the 80 assembly members, talking about legislation and voting, but in those last few days, the senator Weiner, the author, was there on the floor, going
Yeah.
from legislator to legislator, kind of talking quietly, and he really had no other business there other than to try and get this bill through. There was no other legislation held up on his end, and you could see him discussing it with assembly members like O'Donnell, who had come out and opposed it. And when that day, August 31st, when it came and went, and it didn't come up for a vote, it was actually on the last day, it was ordered to the inactive file, which basically means it's they retired it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They'd given up on that. And in the days following that, Weiner put out statements saying, I'm disappointed. The anti-vaccine misinformation crew, beat us out this time, but we'll try again. And he said, but in the end, the vote was close.
Yeah.
Um, and which was odd, seeing that I'm guessing he was, referring to the vote count, if they had
Yeah.
taken a vote. And Assemblymember O'Donnell replied online with, "No, it wasn't." And so it was a very sweet defeat,
Yeah.
um, in my opinion. It was great to see people responding with, "Don't misrepresent this. You know that wasn't the issue, and
Yeah.
it." And but it was a very drawn out battle with this bill.
Right. And I think every legislator office visit, every letter delivered to a legislator's office, every phone call to a legislator's office, every visit
Hmm.
made to a district office, um, every person that sat in the gallery with us day after day. I think every single one of those, yeah, and every person that called in to testify in a committee hearing, every single one of those mattered, because they were all extra pressure, in the middle of them trying to decide what to do in a busy legislative year. This was a heated debate, and it was full of major um, major issues that were going on in California. But this particular bill was definitely brought to people's mind continually throughout the year, and that
Yeah.
worked in our favor because it helped people be convinced that there was not uh, uh, solid public support for this. There was definitely opposition to it.
Yeah, and it was really encouraging, for me, just seeing the support and the consistency of like the people that support FPM, the partners that we have here, and people that we've gotten to know in the legislature, both um, legislators themselves and staff members and everybody in between, it's uh, it's really encouraging to see that common sense and and truth and what and ultimately values that cause families and society to flourish, they do win out.
Right.
It's not all doom and gloom like it's often portrayed as.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, there is
and
hope.
yeah, yeah, and I think this is a really great example of it. And it was a great experience this session for me. This was one of the biggest battles that I've been involved in my in my time at FPM. If not, it probably was the biggest. Um, and it was really great to see it all play out. It was really really educating and encouraging.
Yeah. So thank you to everybody that participated in this victory. I really appreciate all your work. And thanks, Drew, for participating in some of those late nights down at the Capitol.
Yeah,
There were definitely some long days invested in this battle and into this victory. So I'm grateful to everybody that engaged on this bill.
yeah,
It's a real big one. And so I'm glad to be on the other side of that. And we know that those hours counted for something, and we
hmm
can look back on this and know God was there every step of the way, guiding us and leading us to the victory that we have now, and He can do it again. So we need to remember this when we're in the next battle. Remember that God is faithful and He'll bring us through even to the end.
Amen. Yeah, and this won't be the last. I mean, there's been, I don't think these these bills will. Uh, I don't think they've died permanently.
No,
I think for this session, I think there's going to be more attempts next time around, and I mean, we'll be ready for them.
yeah,
And I also want to kind of echo what you said. The everybody that went and visited and talked to legislators. I mean, the amount of people contacting us saying, thank you for this info. I just emailed my legislator. I just sent a letter. Me and my family just went and visited. All of these things. That's it. It means so much more coming from all of you than just from us.
yeah,
You
that's
know.
right. Yep. And like you said, it's not the end. Ultimately, we did not change Senator Wiener's mind on this bill, nor did we change many of the other legislators. But I think we did change the minds of some, and we just need to keep pressing on.
Yep.
So thanks so much, Drew. Thank you for uh, all your work on this bill, and also putting together this timeline for us to sort of talk through. Do you have any last thoughts on this?
Um, I guess. Uh, I mean, I think for everybody out there, the most important thing is to not lose hope, to remember our foundation, and then also just to be vigilant for the future.
Yeah,
We're working hard to make everybody aware of bills like this, and there's going to be more in the future. But I think with the support of everybody out there, there's you know there's no limit to the minds that can be changed.
that's right. That's right.
You know,
Yep.
so yeah,
All right. Well, until next time, thanks so much, Drew, and we'll talk again soon.
yeah. Thank you, Nathan. All right, bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Frontline with FPM. For more information about the topics we discuss here, check out Family Protection Ministries at fpmca.org and subscribe to our channel.